Well, the Ten-Legged Polar Bear, this is a compilation of stories that a teacher from the 1930s collected from her students while she was here. This was published in 1989, and I believe the teacher, Pauline Burker, still lives in Anchorage. And it's just got a bunch of short stories that the kids told. And it might be one of the clearest things about um, our mythological stories that we can have, because these would be completely fresh in the kids' minds. So this is a pretty legit book. But well, the first story I'm going to tell is about the blind hunter. There's this little kid, he was named Kapuyuk, and he was born blind, so he could never really do anything like with his uncles, like go out hunting. So he just stayed home with his grandmother because his parents died. His Akka. That was the only family he had. So she would teach him how to move around with just his ears, his nose, by touch, and she'd tell him to go and grab me that rock over there at the 8 steps in front of you, or you smell the fish, go and grab the fish, it's time to eat. And he figured all this out pretty simply. And by the time he was around 10 or 11, he figured that he wanted to start hunting. So his Akka made him a bow, and he would shoot, and he'd aim with his ears, and he would aim it at just driftwood, and each thud he would learn. He got really, really good at it. And so one day he figures he wants to go and catch a polar bear, and he thinks to himself, how am I going to do this? And like 11, I only have a bow. So what he does is he spreads fish all over the top of the igloo, and he waits all night. He doesn't tell his Akka this is happening, and she's laying there right next to him. And he waits and he waits, and then he starts to hear these really loud crunches in the snow outside, and he smells the Nanook's breath, and it's slowly closing in, and it stands pretty close to the top of the igloo, and it starts eating off of the top. And what he does is he just aims straight up with his bow, and he shoots, and he killed his first Nanook that way. And he wakes up his Akka, wake up! Let's go outside. Let's go pill this Nanook I just caught. And she's like super freaked out. Like she did not expect to see a polar bear dead outside right next to the house. And so they spent all night cutting it up, and then they went back inside. And after that, she started to let him go a little bit further away from the house and go hunting. And he got really good at that because he could hunt with his ears, his nose, with touch as well. And eventually he finds his way to this lake, and this is really far outside of town. And a swan starts to go towards him, and the swan starts talking to him. Do you want to see? Jump on my back. And he's kind of untrusting at first, because you hear a talking swan, you think it might not be a talking swan, but some sort of monster. So he tentatively goes onto the swan's back, and they cross the lake. And on the other side of the lake, he sees this real bright, like blinding flash, and then things start to come into focus for the first time. He thanks the swan, and then he runs back to his Akka, and he tells her that he can see, and they have this big celebration. And after that, he became one of the greatest hunters ever, because he didn't rely only on his sight to hunt. He relied on his ears, his nose, his touch. And that's the story of the blind hunter. The next story is about the man who floated all the way to the other side of the ocean on an ice floe. He was really tentative to go out onto the ice because his father floated away once and never came back. So he was really afraid to go out on the ice all the time. And like his wife started to go hungry because he wouldn't go hunting seals, and none of the land animals were close by enough for him to go and catch. So she chased him out onto the ocean with his own spear and throws it at him and says, "If you come back without anything, I'm going to kill you." So he goes out on the ice, and lo and behold, he actually floats away on an ice floe. And he gets really bad sunburn, and he gets snowblind because he's just stuck on the ice floe. The only way he's surviving is by fish. He's staying in the shadows the entire time, wondering if he's ever going to see land again before he dies. And he lands on he lands over in Greenland, and he's really confused because these Inupiaks that he meets over there, they're speaking like really funny. Like, he doesn't understand them. It's really broken to him. And after they take him in and they help him, and they fix up his eyes and stuff by making him stay inside a dark place for a long time, he starts to pick up the language, and eventually they allow him to be a part of their clan, and he stays with them for a couple of years. He even takes a wife and has a few kids, and he goes to her and he says, I think I want to go back and tell all of my friends and family that I'm alive and that you guys exist." And so she makes him 3 pairs of muckluks, the hard sole kind, and he goes back out on an ice floe, and he starts drifting again, but this time he's ready. He's got his snow goggles. He's got more than just fish to survive off of, and he makes it back, and nobody believes him. They figure that he's just gone crazy from being out on the ice so long, and he goes, and his family and them, they all aren't listening to him, so he decides to go back across back to Greenland to go and see his other family. And this takes about 6 months in between sessions, and he comes back again over to Barrowside, and he's got a whale tattooed in the middle of his back, and that's how we figured out that there were people on the other side of the ocean.
Okay, so I have 2 different versions of a story that goes by a few different names, but the one that it's most commonly known by is The Hunter and the Loon, and it was told from here all the way across to Greenland. So there's different variations on it moving across Canada. So a woman lived with her son and daughter at a faraway land. The son, although young in years, was already a skillful hunter, and the 4 storage platforms built around the igloo were always filled with meat. His success at hunting was so great that the family never wanted for anything. The young hunter's sister loved him dearly, but his mother gradually grew tired of his hunting activities. Each time her son returned home with some game, she would have to work hard at cleaning and skinning the animals and preparing the meat for storage. As time went on, the woman wished more and more to be able to rest, but as long as her son continued to hunt, this was not possible. Eventually, her weariness turned to hatred. One day, while her son was sleeping, the woman took a piece of dirty blubber and rubbed it on his eyes, wishing as she did this so that he would become blind. When the young man awoke, his eyesight was gone. Try as he might, he could see nothing but dim whiteness. From that day on, increasing misery became the lot of the family. The son could do nothing but sit on his bed. His mother tried to provide food for the family by trapping foxes and hunting ptarmigan and ground squirrels. Yet when food was available, the woman refused to give her son anything to eat or drink, but the worst parts of the meat and some foul drinking water. Throughout the spring and summer, the 3 people lived in this manner. One day, shortly after the arrival of winter, the young hunter heard steps on the snow. It was a polar bear trying to get into the igloo through the thin ice window. Asking for his bow, he told his mother to aim the arrow while he pulled back the string. When all was in readiness, the son let fly the arrow. Hearing the sound of the arrow as it thudded into the flesh of the bear, the son was confident that the kill had been made. "I got him," he cried. "No," retorted his mother. "You merely struck a piece of old hide." Shortly thereafter, the smell of bear meat boiling in the cooking pot filled the igloo. The son said nothing, but kept wondering why his mother had lied to him. When the meat was cooked, the woman fed her daughter and herself. To her son, she gave some old fox meat. It was only when she had left the igloo to get water from the lake that the young hunter was brought some bear meat by his sister. 4 years went by while the son remained blind. Then one night, as the fluttering of wings and the cries of the birds announced the coming of spring, the son heard the call of the red-throated loon. As had been his habit during his blindness, he began to crawl on his hands and knees to the lake where he knew the loon would be found. When he arrived at the water's edge, the bird came close to him and said, "Your mother made you blind by rubbing dirt in your eyes while you slept. If you wish, I can wash your eyes for you. Lie flat on my back and hold me by my neck. I shall carry you." The sun doubted that such a small bird would be able to perform such a feat, but the loon reassured him. "Don't think those thoughts. Climb on my back. I'm going to dive with you in the deep water. When you begin to lose your breath, shake your body to signal me." The young man did as he was told and dove down into the lake with the loon. As they descended into the water, the son could feel the body of the loon growing larger and larger between his hands, and the neck seemed to be swelling. When he could hold his breath no longer, he shook his body as he'd been instructed, and the loon brought him up to the surface. "What can you see?" the loon asked. "I can see nothing but great light," replied the son. "I shall take you down into the water once more. When you begin to choke, shake your body a little." This time the dive lasted a long time, but when they finally surfaced, the young man could see clearly. He could distinguish the smallest rocks on the mountain far away. He described what he could see to the loon. "My blindness is gone. My sight is sharper than before." "Your eyesight is too sharp for your own good," the loon told him. "Come down with me once more, and your sight will be restored as it was before your blindness." And it was so. When the young man came out of the water for the last time, his eyesight was as it had been. Now the hunter could see the loon clearly, and he realized that the bird was as large as a kayak. When they had reached the lake shore, the son asked the loon what he could give him in return for his kindness. The loon replied, "I do not want for anything for myself other than a few fishes. Put some in the lake for me once in a while. This is the only food that I look for." The son agreed and proceeded to return to his home. He was painfully surprised to see the wretched conditions in which he had been forced to live. The skins he had used to sleep in were filthy with dirt and bugs. His drinking water and food were crawling with lice. Nevertheless, he sat down in the corner and waited for his mother to awaken. When his mother awoke, the young hunter asked for food and drink. "I am hungry and thirsty. First bring me something to drink." His mother did as she was told, but the water she brought was so dirty that her son handed the cup back to her, saying, "I will not touch such filth." "So you can see, my son," said the woman. She then went to fetch some clean food and water. In time, the young hunter was his old self again and was able to resume his successful hunting trips as before. A year went by, during which time the storage platforms were once more filled with an abundance of game. The following spring, the hunter made ready to go whale hunting. He put a new skin cover on his whaleboat, made lines, harpoons, and spears. When the sea was free of ice, he launched his boat and took his mother with him in search of whales. "Mind the helm," he told her. "I shall look after the harpooning." Here and there they saw a few whales blowing, but the young hunter was waiting until they found a big one close to their boat. Eventually, he called out to his mother, who, not knowing what her son was about to do, came to assist him. He threw his harpoon, making certain that its head had caught in the flesh of the whale, and then quickly tied the other end of the line to his mother's wrist and threw her overboard. Caught as she was, the woman was dragged through the water, bobbing up and down the waves. She cried out and reproached her son, saying, "When you were young, I gave you my breast to suckle. I fed you and kept you clean, and now you do this to me?" Finally, she disappeared from sight. For years to come, hunters claimed that they saw her in the waves and heard her song of despair as it was carried far and wide by the winds. So that was the first version, and then the second version that I have is a little bit shorter, and this one I got from a website that is in Nunavut, so I'm going to run with the assumption that this is a more Canadian version, maybe in the Nunavut area. There was a man who might be described as a small-time medicine power person. Big and powerful medicine power people are quite safe from harm because it takes powerful medicine or a combination of different medicine powers to hurt them in any way. Some medicine powers are weak. A person's power can be damaged if the recipient of that power does not look after it. There was a family where the man had medicine power from a few things, but the power was not very strong. If someone with medicine power wanted to do harm to this man, it could be done. This man had a bad wife. She fooled around with young men and she had wanted to get rid of her husband. The wife had a dirty and evil mind. She thought that if she walked over her husband's body while he was asleep and over his hunting gear, including his cap, his medicine power would kill him. Then she would be free, she thought, so this is what the woman did. The husband did not know what his wife was up to and ended up having trouble from his medicine power, but he didn't die. He went completely blind instead. The family was now living with a blind man. They started to have a lot of problems and became very poor. They were living on a fish lake. One night, the woman decided to leave her husband. She got all her children and took off into the country, leaving the blind man by himself. When the blind man woke up, he called out for his wife and children to get up because he was hungry. Nobody answered. The blind man could not stand anymore, so he started crawling around. He found out that no one was in the tent. The blind man crawled down the hill to the lakeshore for a drink of water. He sat on the shore feeling really bad, abandoned, and very alone. He wondered why so much misfortune was happening to him. Then the man heard a loon calling not far away. The blind man had loon medicine power, therefore he could talk to the loon. He yelled at the loon, "Come here! Why do you say you are my partner if you won't help me?" The man crawled to the water again and drank. Then he sat. A loon swam toward him and asked, "What is the matter, stranger? I heard you yelling." "Yes," said the man. "A long time ago you told me we were partners. If that is the case, maybe you could help me now." "What is the problem?" the loon asked. "Somehow I became completely blind. I can't see anything. On top of that, my family abandoned me. I think I will die," the man said. Loon told him, "Get on top of my back. I will swim a bit with you. I might be able to help you." The blind man crawled on top of the loon's back. They swam around for a bit. The loon said, "Hold on to my neck. I will dive with you and see what happens." The loon dove with the man on his back. After a while, the loon came up to the surface. "How do you see?" he asked the blind man. "It's different now," the man replied. "I will dive with you again," the loon said. The loon took the man underwater and then resurfaced. "How do you see now?" the loon asked. "I can see better. I can see the shore, but it's kind of a blur," the man replied. The loon said, "I will take you down one more time." This time, the loon spent more time underwater than previously. Then he took the man back up to the surface. "How do you see now?" the loon asked. The man yelled, "I can see perfect now. I can see everything good." The loon told him, "I will take you back to where I picked you up." The man was so happy that he got all his sight back. The loon did that for him. So that's the story.
Okay. So in this story, there's two very beautiful young girls. And they're in a village, and from what I gathered in the story, there's a body of water. I think it's called an inlet. Is that what it's called? Is that? I'm just asking. I don't know what an inlet is. I'm really new to this whole thing. So an inlet. Okay. So there's two sides, and then the inlet. There's I don't know what the body of water is, but so there's a tribe on one side of the inlet, and in this tribe there's these two beautiful daughters, and they're almost about at that age where they're going to get married, and their father is a very rich, wealthy chief, but it's not a chief. He's considered an elder in this story, and so these two girls. Well, one of them's older and one of them's younger. The older one, she's very proper and very beautiful and very good looking, and then the other sister's beautiful too, but she's more young and kind of still scampers around because she's still a little kid, but the older one is more, grown up, and the other one's still like young. And so the older sister, who's very beautiful, she's also really mean. She's very, very mean, vicious, backbiting. Nobody really likes her, but she's beautiful. And then the other sister, so she's so nice and so sweet, and she always wants to help out, and she's always, and in the story it says that she would run across the village just to make somebody smile. She's just really good-spirited girl, and the other one's not so wonderful. And so, so they're about that age to marry, and then years come later, and what exactly happens? Oh, so they're trying to find men in the village, boys and, men pretty much, in the village to marry these girls, but nobody wants to marry their older sister. But not everybody, but some boys want to marry the younger sister, but it's kind of like tradition, like cultural law, to be like, okay, well, the older sister has to get married first before the younger sister. That's just not fair. And so they try and do like I don't know, in the story it's something like about how they just try and get the boys to know the girls, and like the boys are like, yeah, the younger girl's nice, but the older one's just so mean. I don't care how beautiful she is. She's very beautiful, but she's just so rude. And so they find, let's see, where am I at? I hope I'm not skipping anything. That's what I'm worried about. I'll try. Oops. Sorry. One moment. gosh, I just lost my thing. I am so sorry. Okay. Sorry, long pause. I'm gonna just follow the story for what is written because I'm kind of messing up. Okay. So there was a contrast between the two sisters, like I said earlier. The older one, the people couldn't stand to have around, and the younger one ran to make people smile all day. So because one of them is so mean, they were like, okay, well, let's try and get 2 other boys from another village to come meet these girls, because maybe if we get somebody who's outside of the village who doesn't know how mean the sister is, maybe we can get them to marry her. So they have these 2 boys come from a place, and they're both very handsome looking men, and they assume in the story that they're from a place called the Copper River Basin, and it's because they're like of darker skin, and I guess they're considered to be shiny looking, which is I guess a good thing. And let's see, and the people in the Copper River Basin have darker skin. Okay, of these 2 brothers, the older one fell in love with the older sister, the mean sister, and the younger one fell in love with the happy sister, but he felt bad that they couldn't get married until the older sister got married. She was being so hateful, and she wouldn't marry this brother who went ahead and asked her to anyway, because he figured that he better ask her just so that his brother could marry the pretty sister, which is the younger one. So there was a lot of like arguing, and the people were telling the older brother, "Oh, don't marry her. It doesn't matter if you don't know her, or not that, but like, don't marry her. Maybe you shouldn't because she's just so mean." And then the older male said, "Oh, but if I don't marry her, my younger brother can't get married to the younger sister because that's what he really wants." And finally, the older sister said, "I'm leaving here. I'm just going to read this. I don't know if she did it out of kindness or what. I doubt there was kindness. She took one of her father's skin boats, got on the paddle, and got some food and all the bedding and everything that she would need and put it all in the skin boat." So the older sister took off. And the older sister said, "I'm going away and I'm not going to come back, so this will settle the problem." And it goes on to say, "I can imagine her feelings were probably badly hurt because she wasn't threatening to leave and nobody was saying, 'No, don't go.'" So the time came for her to leave, and there were people there to wave goodbye, but they didn't actually wave because she was so mean. They were just happy that they danced and they sang because she was leaving. So when this older sister disappeared, the younger sister went ahead and got married to the younger brother, and they were so happy. They made the perfect pair. They were good-natured, and they did everything good for everybody. And in the summer, when they got married, through the fall and the winter, they helped gather food and helped everybody else be prepared for the winter when it was going to come. And then the younger sister, said through the winter she got a really bad feeling about her sister because her sister was gone. She had gotten the boat and rowed across the inlet and went to the other side. And then the younger sister, who was married, said, "I think we should find out what has happened to my sister," she said. And she finally convinced her husband that they both should go. And the older brother said, No, you guys don't have to go. I want to go, and it's my place to go because I'm the one who is in love with her." So he went to her father and talked to him. He said, "I'll take a skin boat and I'll go out and I'll go find her. By now, being alone for this long, I'm sure she will have changed and she'll be a different person and she will love me and accept me. And I'll bring her back as a changed person." So he went ahead, and people didn't want him to try and go at first, but the father finally said okay, and he provided the skin boat for him to go. The brother went across the inlet. He searched up and down the other side, and finally in one of the rivers, the mouth of the river, he saw he had missed the first time, was the frame of the skin boat that was hauled. So it doesn't say like what time period, but apparently she rode up and she left the skin boat there, and she'd been on the island for some time, so it was just the frame of it by then, so it's like pretty tattered and old probably from the winter. So he went ashore, and sure enough, it was her skin boat. And there was a place where there had been a fire. There were bones and things, so he could tell that she had been there, and she'd probably been eating. He called, and he figured, okay, tomorrow I'm going to go out and search for her. Then he made a fire and laid his furs out and lay down. He figured he would sleep well tonight, and tomorrow he would look for her. He called, and no answer came, so he went ahead and fell asleep. Just before he fell asleep, he was looking into the fire and thinking about how beautiful it was going to be when he found her and how changed she would be. And he dozed off by the fire. And all of a sudden he awoke and he realized that there was the sister. She was coming toward him in the firelight, and she was just as beautiful as ever. She was so beautiful. And he was about half awake and half asleep in front of that fire. And he put his arms out just as she came right to him and got into his arms and snuggled down into his furs and became his wife. Then he just held her up and slept. Oh, he just held her and slept. In the morning he awoke and looked at his sleeping face of his wife, thinking how beautiful she must be. But instead of his face of his wife, he saw the face of a bear. He was looking into the face of a brown bear. And so he had to make up his mind. Was he going to leave her there and go back to the Kenai village? Okay, it was in Kenai. Or would he stay there with her? He tried to talk to her, and he figured, no, I can't leave her here by herself, so he stayed. When he didn't come back, and the other brother and the other sister went ahead and got in the skin boat and went looking for him. They searched, and they finally saw the two skin boats, the frames of two skin boats, up in the reeds and in the grass. When they looked, they could see the fire pit. They could see the rocks around where the fire had been, and the ashes and there was the furs still there too. They could tell that they weren't being used because the wind had blown the sand onto them, so they weren't sleeping in those furs. And the brother said, well, we'll just go ahead and build a fire here, then tomorrow we'll look for them. So the sister called, and there was no answer while her husband was getting the fire built. And just as they got nice and comfortable, they saw two big brown bears circling around the camp. They were very angry, and they were snarling, and they were showing that they did not want people around there. They were exceptionally big and exceptionally mean. So the brother and his wife had ran to the skin boat and put her in the skin, and he'd put her in the skin boat, and they paddled out from ashore. And these two mean bears even swam out from the shore, away snarling and fighting. So the brother and sister never came back. Now that's why the brown bears on the other side of the inlet are meaner than the brown bears on this side. What the story was.
Okay, so James Talkbook is my great-great-grandfather, and he was a great whaler back in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and he did not have any sons. He had one daughter, and she had a bunch of kids, and she died pretty young. And his son-in-law remarried a woman who did not want to help raise his children and did not like to provide for the community like a whaling captain's wife should. So James Talkbook and his wife ended up raising his grandchildren. One of them was Araka Susan, and the youngest one was Ralph Malik Akiva. And he was one of the last great whalers that was taught under James Talkbook while he was still alive. And I'm going to tell the story of when he went out with Putkuduk crew probably 20 years ago now. And it was fall whaling, so they were going out on motorboats, and most of the crews start getting into the ocean while it's still dark out, about 6 in the morning. And our crew was running late, so they finally got out there about 8 when all the other crews were chasing a whale already. It was the last strike of the season. And we had the slowest motor on the smallest boat, and we were a couple hours behind everybody else. But we had Malik on our boat. So they're all chasing the whale, and our boat's catching up, and he learned how to read waves from James' talkbook. So as they're starting to finally catch up to the boats, Malik tells them to turn around, like go the opposite direction that all the other boats were going. And all the crew members are like, what are you talking about? The whale's over there. He said, no, just turn around, just go in this direction. So they listened to him. They turned the boat, and he was telling them exactly where to go. And while all the other boats were chasing where the whale was going the last time they saw him, it came up right next to the boat while they were going the opposite direction, and they were able to strike it, kill it, and they had the last strike of the season. And that was, he was a great whaler that would jump from crew to crew throughout his whaling career. So his last time out there, it was pretty rough. I can't remember the crew that he was whaling with that time. They caught a whale, and because it was getting windier and windier, he knew that they should have cut the whale off, but he decided to try to hold on to it, because one thing that James' talkbook taught him was it's really bad to strike a whale and then lose it. That's like one of the worst things that a whaler, you know, that feeling that a whaler could have is to lose a strike. So he just held on to it, and there was an accident. The rope pulled him into the water, and they could not revive him. So while that was happening, my Aka Susan ended up in the hospital. We always felt like they were connected in a way, because she knew something was wrong. She had health issues the same moment that he was pulled into the water. And she was an inpatient when they rolled him into the emergency room, and they tried to revive him. And he died that day, and she died shortly after that. So he died doing what he always loved to do. And I don't think there's anybody else after his generation that knows how to read the waves like he did. So we lost a lot of knowledge with him. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Otis Akibka, my great-grandfather. When he was younger, he was walking all by himself from Barrow to Atkazuk, and it was getting dark, and in the distance he saw this figure. So he got excited, and he was like, all right, I can walk with someone. So he started walking a little faster, trying to catch up to the person he saw. And as he got closer and closer and closer, he thought, this guy is pretty tall. And he got a little closer, and he saw that this guy was 3 feet above the ground. And he veered off, trying to get away from him. And he looked back, and the figure started following him. So he started walking a little faster. And he turned back, and it was going faster, catching up to him. So he started running. And he turned back, and it was like just coming upon him, and he fell down, and he didn't believe in God at the time. And he said, Jesus, if you're real, save me. And he turned back, and it was gone. And that's the day he became a Christian. So years later, he had his family, and this is before Malik was born. Samuel was the baby. Shaman, or Anatka, called on him. He had a pregnant wife with a breech baby, and he sent a messenger to Otis for help during the delivery, because he was a Sapdakti, a traditional healer, and he would be able to turn the baby. But the messenger didn't tell him the whole message. He just said, this shaman is asking for you, and he needs you. And he didn't say why. So Otis didn't want to have anything to do with him, because he didn't want to help a shaman, being a Christian now. And so the messenger went back to the shaman and told him that Otis wasn't coming, and the shaman's wife ended up dying trying to give birth to the breech baby. So the shaman blamed Otis for his wife's death, and he went into a trance, and he went into Otis's home, and he got the whole family, the ones that he could touch, he got them sick. Later on, he told people that when he went in there was this bright light around Otis and his wife and the oldest daughter, Susan. But the other kids got sick, and Samuel ended up dying during that whole thing. So that is how shamanism affected Otis after he accepted Jesus as his Lord and Savior.
So this story is one that I first heard and read for a class I took down at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I was in a class called Indigenous Narratives of Place, and our professor for that class is Dr. Susan Scarberry Garcia, and she spent a lot of time in the Arctic, and she loves everything to do with the Arctic. So I'd never heard of this story, but it's by Knut Rasmussen, and he traveled all over the Arctic, and his mother was from Greenland, I believe. And afterwards I'll tell you why it has a little more importance to me when I heard it. So I'm going to read it. And it's kind of split up, so I have some of it is on the computer and some's on paper. The title is How Awa Became a Shaman. And I think it's pronounced Awa, it's A-U-A. Does anybody know if Awa, I don't know, Awa. Awa was an Igloolik Eskimo who was born about 1870 and interviewed by the Danish explorer Knud Rasmussen about 1922. An Anakuk, or shaman, Awa speaks of the curious circumstances of his birth and of his acquisition of special powers, particularly those of the Awa. Quote, a little spirit, a woman that lives down by the seashore, from which he takes his name. Rasmussen, the son of a Danish pastor, had some Eskimo blood in his distant background, although he was not, as is sometimes said, a recently acculturated Eskimo himself. He seems to have known the languages of several of the peoples he visited quite well, and to have achieved an unusually good rapport and ease with them. He died in 1933. And this story is originally found in Rasmussen's Intellectual Culture of the Igloolik Eskimos, as Awa is consecrated to the spirits. I was yet but a tiny unborn infant in my mother's womb when anxious folk began to inquire sympathetically about me. All the children my mother had had before had lain crosswise and had been stillborn. As soon as my mother now perceived that she was with child, the child that one day was to be me, she spoke thus to her housefellows. Now I have again that within me which will turn out no real human being. All were very sorry for her, and a woman named Arjuak, who was a shaman herself, called up her spirits that same evening to help my mother. And the very next morning it could be felt that I had grown, but it did me no good at the time, for Arjuak had forgotten that she must do no work the day after a spirit calling, and had mended a hole in a mitten. This breach of taboo at once had its effect upon me. My mother felt the birth pangs coming on before the time, and I kicked and struggled as if trying to work my way out through her side. A new spirit calling then took place, and as all precepts were duly observed this time, it helped both my mother and myself. But then one day it happened that my father, who was going out on a journey to hunt, was angry and impatient, and in order to calm him, my mother went to help him harness the dogs to the sledge. She forgot that in her condition, all work was taboo, and so, hardly had she picked up the traces and lifted one dog's paw before I began again, kicking and struggling and trying to get out through her navel. And again, we had to have a shaman to help us. Old people now assured my mother that my great sensitiveness to any breach of taboo was a sign that I should live to become a great shaman. But at the same time, many dangers and misfortunes would pursue me before I was born. My father had got a walrus with its unborn young one, and when he began cutting it out, without reflecting that my mother was with child, I again fell to struggling within the womb, and this time in earnest. But the moment I was born, all life left me, and I lay there dead as a stone. The cord was twisted around my neck and had strangled me. Arjuak, who lived in another village, was at once sent for, and a special hut was built for my mother. When Arjuak came and saw me with my eyes sticking right out of my head, she wiped my mother's blood from my body with the skin of a raven and made a little jacket for me of the same skin. "He is born to die, but he shall live," she said. And so Arjuak stayed with my mother until I showed signs of life. Mother was put on a very strict diet and had to observe difficult rules of taboo. If she'd eaten part of a walrus, for instance, then that walrus was taboo to all others. The same with seal and caribou. She had to have special pots from which no one else was allowed to eat. No woman was allowed to visit her, but men might do so. My clothes were made after a particular fashion. The hair of the skins must never lie pointing upwards or down, but fall athwart the body. Thus I lived in the birth hut, unconscious of all of the care that was being taken with me. For a whole year, my mother and I had to live entirely alone, only visited now and again by my father. He was a great hunter and always out after game, but in spite of this, he was never allowed to sharpen his own knives. As soon as he did so, his hand began to swell and I fell ill. A year after my birth, we were allowed to have another person in the house with us. It was a woman, and she had to be very careful herself. Whenever she went out, she must throw her hood over her head, wear boots without stockings, and hold the tail of her fur coat lifted high in one hand. I was already a big boy when my mother was first allowed to go visiting. All were anxious to be kind, and she was invited to all of the other families. But she stayed out too long. The spirits do not like women with little children to stay too long away from their house, and they took vengeance in this wise. The skin of her head peeled off, and I, who had no understanding of anything at that time, beat her about the body with my little fists as she went home, and made water down her back. No one who is to become a skillful hunter or a good shaman must remain out too long when visiting strange houses, and the same holds good for a woman with a child in her amount. At last, I was big enough to go out with the grown-up men to the blowholes after seal. The day I harpooned my first seal, my father had to lie down on the ice with the upper part of his body naked, and the seal I had caught was dragged across his back while it was still alive. Only men were allowed to eat of my first catch, and nothing must be left. The skin and the head were set on the ice in order that I might be able later on to catch the same seal again. For 3 days and nights, none of the men who had eaten of it might go out hunting or do any kind of work. The next animal I killed was a caribou. I was strictly forbidden to use a gun and had to kill it with bow and arrows. This animal also only men were allowed to eat. No woman might touch it. Some time passed, and I grew up and was strong enough to go out hunting walrus. The day I harpooned my first walrus, my father shouted at the top of his voice the names of all the villages he knew and cried, "Now there is food for all." The walrus was towed into land while it was still alive, and not until we reached the shore was it finally killed. My mother, who was to cut it up, had the harpoon line made fast to her body before the harpoon head was withdrawn. After having killed this walrus, I was allowed to eat all those delicacies which had formerly been forbidden, yes, even entrails, and women were now allowed to eat of my catch, as long as they were not with child or recently delivered. Only my own mother had still to observe great caution, and whenever she had any sewing to do, a special hut had to be built for her. I had been named after a little spirit, Awa, and it was said that it was in order to avoid offending the spirit that my mother had to be so particular about everything she did. It was my guardian spirit and took great care that I should not do anything that was forbidden. I was never allowed, for instance, to remain in a snow hut where young women were undressing for the night, nor might any woman comb her hair while I was present. Even after I had been married a long time, my catch was still subject to strict taboo. If there but lived women with infants near us, my own wife was only allowed to eat meat of my killing, and no other woman was allowed to satisfy her hunger with the meat of any animal of which my wife had eaten. Any walrus I killed was further subject to the rule that no woman might eat of its entrails, which are reckoned a great delicacy, and this prohibition was maintained until I had 4 children of my own. And it is really only since I had grown old that the obligations laid on me by Arjuak in order that I might live have ceased to be needful. Everything was thus made ready for me beforehand, even from the time when I was yet unborn. Nevertheless, I endeavored to become a shaman by the help of others, but in this I did not succeed. I visited many famous shamans and gave them great gifts, which they at once gave away to others, for if they had kept the things for themselves, they or their children would have died. This they believed because my own life had been so threatened from birth. Then I sought solitude, and here I soon became very melancholy. I would sometimes fall to weeping and feel unhappy without knowing why. Then for no reason all would suddenly be changed, and I felt a great, inexplicable joy, a joy so powerful that I could not restrain it but had to break into song, a mighty song, with only room for the one word, joy, joy, and I had to use the full strength of my voice. And then in the midst of such a fit of mysterious and overwhelming delight, I became a shaman, not knowing myself how it came about. But I was a shaman. I could see and hear in a totally different way. I had gained my kalmanek, my enlightenment, the shaman light of brain and body, and this in such a manner that it was not only I who could see through the darkness of life, but the same light also shone out from me, imperceptible to human beings, but visible to all the spirits of earth and sky and sea, and these now came to me and became my helping spirits. My first helping spirit was my namesake, a little awa. When it came to me, it was as if the passage and roof of the house were lifted up, and I felt such a power of vision that I could see right through the house, in through the earth and up into the sky. It was the little awa that brought me all this inward light, hovering over me as long as I was singing. Then it placed itself in a corner of the passage, invisible to others, but always ready if I should call it. An awa is a little spirit, a woman that lives down by the seashore. There are many of these shore spirits who run about with a pointed skin hood on their heads. Their breeches are queerly short and made of bearskin. They wear long boots with a black pattern and coats of sealskin. Their feet are twisted upward, and they seem to walk only on their heels. They hold their hands in such a fashion that the thumb is always bent in over the palm. Their arms are held raised up on high with the hands together and incessantly stroking the head. They are bright and cheerful when one calls them, and resemble most of all sweet little live dolls. They are no taller than the length of a man's arm. My second helping spirit was a shark. One day when I was out in my kayak, it came swimming up to me, lay alongside quite silently, and whispered my name. I was greatly astonished, for I had never seen a shark before. They are very rare in these waters. Afterwards it helped me with my hunting, and was always near me when I had need of it. These two, the shore spirit and the shark, were my principal helpers, and they could aid me in everything I wished. The song I generally sang when calling them was a few words as follows. Joy, 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 I see a little shore spirit, a little awa. I myself am also awa, the shore spirit's namesake. Joy, joy. These words I would keep on repeating until I burst into tears, overwhelmed by a great dread. Then I would tremble all over, crying only, aha, joy, joy, now I will go home, joy, joy. Once I lost a son, and felt that I could never again leave the spot where I had laid his body. I was like a mountain spirit, afraid of humankind. We stayed for a long time up inland, and my helping spirits forsook me, for they do not like live human beings to dwell upon any sorrow. But one day, the song about joy came to me all of itself and quite unexpectedly. I felt once more a longing for my fellow men, my helping spirits returned to me, and I was myself once more. And that's the end of that little story. So...